Rome 212 years after the birth of Christ. The marble floors of the imperial palace glisten with fresh water poured by trembling slaves, but the scent in the air is still blood. A woman named Marcia Domitilla kneels before a golden bust of the emperor. Her husband was loyal to Geta. Now he is gone, and she wears no veil, no jewelry, no name. Behind her, the shadow of a Roman officer tightens his grip on a scroll bearing the imperial seal. Her sentence is not written in words, it is written in silence, humiliation, and a life without identity. Caracalla was born with a sword already hanging over his brother's head. When their father, Septimius Severus, ruled the empire, he told both sons, "Keep the army on your side, and the world is yours." But when the emperor died on the cold plains of Britannia, the message became a warning. Caracalla and Geta returned to Rome as co-emperors, a title the city pretended to accept. Behind palace walls, they divided everything: palace rooms, praetorian guards, even their mother Julia Domna's time. Servants walked the corridors unsure which emperor's orders would lead to safety and which to death. Then, in one calculated stroke, the tension shattered. Caracalla requested a private meeting with his brother to reconcile, asking Julia to be present to ensure peace. What followed would haunt Rome forever. In the middle of her own chambers, Julia watched as soldiers rushed in and stabbed Geta in her arms. The screams never left the marble. Caracalla stood still, unblinking, and declared himself sole ruler of the empire. What followed was not a purge, it was a plague of revenge. In a single season, nearly 20,000 names vanished from Roman life. Senators, generals, scribes, poets, anyone who had spoken kindly of Geta cut down. But what chilled the empire most was who Caracalla did not kill: the wives, the mothers, the daughters. He left them alive, not out of mercy, but cruelty. These women were dragged from their homes in daylight, their dowries seized, their names erased from family records. Some were sold into remote provinces as servants to lesser Roman officials. Others were forced to remarry soldiers, stripped of dignity and tossed into loveless unions as tools of mockery. The Senate dared not protest. Caracalla claimed it was not treason to punish disloyal households, and a woman who shared a bed with a traitor had already committed one sin too many. In whispered corners of the city, people began to call him not emperor but the butcher of bloodlines. Rome's women began to fear the sound of boots in the street, not for their husbands, but for themselves. Because in Caracalla's reign, the body of a wife was not sacred, it was a battlefield, and he had declared war. After Geta's blood dried on the floor of his mother's chamber, Caracalla did not retreat, he advanced. His war was not against a single man, but against memory itself. The day after his brother's death, Rome awoke to silence. Names were no longer spoken aloud. Senators arrived to find their seats in the curia empty or filled by strangers. Letters were burned, portraits vanished from the walls, but Caracalla's true cruelty began in private homes where the wives of his enemies still breathed. He could not allow them to become symbols of loyalty, or worse, of martyrdom, and so he turned them into warnings. Some were dragged from their villas in the early dawn, barefoot, hair unpinned, forced to walk behind the litters of soldiers as the crowd watched in quiet horror. They were not touched with blades. Caracalla believed in a cleaner form of punishment, the kind that lasted. In one case, a noblewoman named Vibia Crispina was forced to watch as her household slaves were sold off one by one, her villa dismantled, and her wedding gown burned in the street while the crowd laughed on command. Her punishment was to remain alive in a world that would never again call her noble. Another, Lollia Paetina, was ordered to remarry a crippled grain merchant from Ostia as a message to the rest: the emperor can unmake you. From marble halls to damp stone cellars, from embroidered silks to coarse wool tunics, they were transformed in days. No court would hear them, no priest would bless them. Their sin was being loved by the wrong man. It was not just vengeance, it was rebranding. Caracalla began to rename these women in state records, stripping away the proud family names they carried. Domitia became Domita, Fulvia became Fulva, their names twisted into crude imitations of what they once were. Their sons were barred from public office. Their daughters were denied dowries. The empire watched as entire bloodlines withered under the sun of Caracalla's rage. Even tombs were not safe. In cities across the empire, guards arrived with chisels, ordered to erase names from gravestones. In some cases, bones were dug up and cast into the Tiber, as if the dead themselves offended imperial peace. But no punishment cut deeper than silence. Rome's women, once the center of banquet halls and gardens, learned to keep their voices low. They walked with eyes lowered, knowing that grief itself could be seen as rebellion. Every time one of them lit a lamp, every time a hand reached for a ring hidden in a drawer, it was a risk. In this new Rome, it was not enough to be innocent. You had to be invisible, and under Caracalla, invisibility was the only safety left. Marcia Domitilla had once walked through Rome draped in violet silk, the scent of rosewater trailing behind her, her arm gently looped through the elbow of her husband, Senator Gaius Silanus. People bowed when she passed. Her face had adorned mosaics in private villas, her name whispered at feasts as a woman of both grace and cunning. But that was before Geta's blood stained the palace floor, before her husband's name vanished from every scroll in the archives, before she was dragged from her own atrium while her slaves screamed and the marble lion in her fountain watched without blinking. They did not kill her. That would have been too swift. Instead, she was transported in the back of a covered cart to a remote villa outside the city, once belonging to a minor magistrate now loyal to Caracalla. There, she was stripped of everything that connected her to power. The imperial decree renamed her Domitia Nocta, Night Without Honor. Her jewelry was confiscated, her clothes replaced with coarse gray linen. Her hair was shorn above the shoulders, not in mourning, but in mockery. She was given a single room, a stone cell with a bed of straw and a cracked mirror facing the corner. The guards called her wife of the traitor and spat near her feet but never touched her. They didn't need to. Caracalla's cruelty was not lustful, it was theatrical. He wanted Rome to see what became of a noblewoman who stood on the wrong side of history. Every morning, she was made to kneel in the garden and pour water over the hands of the wives of Caracalla's allies. These women, once beneath her, now smiled with satisfaction as she scrubbed their sandals and bowed before them. She was not beaten. That would have earned her sympathy. She was broken with dignity, piece by piece, until her silence became her only possession. But what made Marcia's fate truly unbearable was the rumor. A whisper that Caracalla himself had chosen her punishment not for politics, but for memory. She had once been seen in the baths speaking warmly to Julia Domna, the emperor's mother. She had once spoken Geta's name aloud at a gathering. That was enough. Now, in her room, she kept her fingers folded around a hidden object. Her husband's ring slipped from his hand before the guards took him. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not plead. But at night, when the torches outside her window cast long shadows across the walls, she pressed the cold metal to her lips and remembered who she had been. In the empire of Caracalla, remembrance was rebellion, and even stripped of her name, her rank, and her voice, Marcia Domitilla remembered. The empire had long known how to kill a man, but under Caracalla, Rome learned how to kill a legacy. With Geta's allies buried or vanished, Caracalla turned to the tools of psychological annihilation. He did not only want his enemies dead, he wanted them forgotten. It began with a single decree, carved into marble and read aloud in the Senate. All records bearing Geta's name were to be destroyed. His statues were to be smashed. His face removed from coins, his memory damned. It was called Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. But what followed stretched far beyond one man's erasure. It seeped into the households of Rome like smoke, invisible and suffocating. The wives of the executed found their husbands' names scratched from public rolls, their property deeds reissued under the empire, their children declared illegitimate in whispers no one dared to challenge. Priests were forbidden to utter the names of the dead in ritual. Tombstones were broken open. In one district, an entire necropolis was burned because too many of Geta's supporters lay beneath its soil. Those who had once built legacies through lineage now watched as their bloodlines were choked off by silence. No name, no heir, no history. But the cruelty ran deeper. Caracalla issued a new protocol through his magistrates. The wives of traitors were no longer allowed to wear mourning veils or perform public rites of grief. To weep for the condemned was to share in their guilt. Some obeyed, some swallowed their pain and learned to smile in the marketplaces, pretending they had no past. Others did not. In one chilling account, a woman named Tullia Severina was seen kneeling at her husband's defaced tomb at night, whispering his name into the dirt. The next morning, her tongue was found nailed to the grave's edge as a warning. Even the children were not spared. Boys once destined for the Senate or the army were reassigned to menial labor. Girls were forbidden from marrying into noble houses, their names stained by association. Caracalla's purge did not scream, it whispered. It smothered. It taught Rome a lesson. To remember was to rebel. To speak the past was to invite its punishment. In the libraries, scribes were ordered to erase entire sections of text, to redact names in black ink, to pretend that decades of public service and family honor had never existed. And all the while, Caracalla stood beneath the statues of emperors past, a living god in his own eyes, molding history with his fists. But in the quiet homes of the city, candles still flickered, rings were hidden beneath floorboards, lockets containing small portraits were sealed behind loose stones. Mothers whispered names into their children's ears before sleep. They would not write them, they would not say them in public. But in the dark, behind closed doors, the women of Rome kept the dead alive with memory alone. She stood in the center of the forum as though she had not heard what they had done to the others. Her name was Aurelia Faustina, daughter of a consul, widow of General Marcus Aelianus, who had fought alongside Geta to the bitter end. Most women had learned silence by now. They kept their heads down, mouths closed, names buried, but not Aurelia. She wore black, not the dull gray cloth assigned to widows of traitors, but a rich, dark wool that draped like a defiant shadow across her shoulders. Around her neck hung a bronze ring on a leather cord her husband's. She held no sign, carried no scroll, but her presence, her stillness, her refusal to be erased, was enough to stir the watchers from their sleep. It began with a whisper. Some thought she had lost her mind. Others claimed she was calling on the gods. But when she opened her mouth, her voice was clear, strong. She spoke only one thing, his name, Marcus Aelianus. She said it twice, once to the sky, once to the crowd. The effect was instant. A merchant dropped his basket of figs. A priest stepped backward. 2 guards froze, unsure whether to act. No one had dared speak the names of the condemned in public since the purge began. The air around her seemed to tremble. Within minutes, word reached the Palatine Hill. An act of memory, an act of rebellion. Caracalla, who claimed to descend from gods and commanded armies with a glance, issued the order himself. No torture, no execution, no spectacle of blood. What he ordered instead was colder. She was to be sealed, alive, in silence. They took her from the forum at dusk, bound her hands but left her mouth uncovered. She did not struggle. As the cart moved through the streets, she kept her eyes on the horizon, murmuring her husband's name like a prayer. When they reached the mausoleum on the outskirts of the city, the workers were already waiting. A tomb had been emptied, a stone door refitted, no inscription was carved. They placed her inside with a single lamp and enough water to last a few days. She said nothing to the guards, only clutched the ring at her chest and closed her eyes. Then the stone slid into place. The light from the torch outside vanished. In the weeks that followed, no one mentioned her. The forum returned to its routines. The merchants sold their goods. The magistrates issued their edicts. But some nights, when the wind blew from the east, a whisper could be heard near the tombs. Not a scream, not weeping, just a woman's voice, repeating a name the emperor wanted forgotten. It did not fade, it did not die, it endured, because sometimes defiance is not loud. It is quiet and eternal. By the end of that year, the streets of Rome had forgotten how to grieve. Black veils no longer fluttered in the wind. Funeral processions moved in silence, stripped of music and prayer. Names once etched in stone had been scraped clean, leaving only pale scars on the marble. Caracalla ruled alone now, unchallenged and untouched, his wrath no longer loud but lingering. The women who remained understood the lesson. Power could not be mourned. Loyalty could not be remembered. Love, once shared openly in courtyards and porticos, had become a dangerous inheritance. What the sword did not destroy, silence would. In the villas, noble women walked like ghosts, their husbands gone, their sons shamed, their daughters traded into obscure marriages arranged by fearful uncles. No one dared write letters anymore. Too many messengers had vanished. Even the gods seemed to step back, as temples avoided prayers that echoed the past. But it was in this quiet, beneath the surface of obedience, that something far more enduring began to stir. They could not light sacred fires, but they cooked his favorite meal on his birthday. They could not speak his name, but they hummed his favorite tune while weaving. They stitched initials into the corners of tunics meant for sons. They pressed kisses to hidden rings, carved symbols into the backs of mirrors, and prayed to no one in particular while holding the objects they refused to let go. Their rebellion was not one of swords or speeches. It was in every small act of remembrance. It was in surviving without surrender. Caracalla would go on to call himself a god. He would ride through the eastern provinces draped in gold, slaughter civilians in Alexandria for mocking him, and force the empire to swallow his madness like wine. But behind the polished busts and bronze coins, a truth remained. He did not destroy his enemies. He only drove them into the shadows, where they waited, invisible but breathing. Marcia Domitilla lived out her years in exile. Aurelia's tomb was sealed and overgrown with ivy, but no one dared open it. And across Rome, countless women with names unrecorded continued the quiet war of memory. Their suffering was meant to erase them. Instead, it became their monument. Because the deepest cruelty is not always death. Sometimes it is survival without justice, endurance without name. But in that endurance, a story forms. A story the empire tried to bury. A story we now remember. If this piece of forgotten history shook you, then help us keep these voices alive. Subscribe, share, and join us as we uncover the darkest truths the ancient world tried to silence. Because history does not forget, it waits,